Glad to see you all here. Becky in the house today. Woo woo. No, y'all settled? All right, everyone get up. I know you just got settled. No, for real. Get everyone stand up for real, for real. I know you're going to like today's sermon, but before we get into it, I want to do a little exercise. And I want you all to close your eyes. And I want you to clear your mind of any distractions. And I want you to concentrate on thinking about absolutely nothing. So you're clearing your mind completely. And just be still with an empty mind. And as you're doing that, without peeking or looking at your neighbor, this isn't something you can cheat on. I want you to sit down the minute a thought enters your mind and you start entertaining that thought. Okay, go. All right, open your eyes. There's one person staying. You can go home. You don't need the message. Just kidding. No. What I'm trying to prove here is that we get so distracted easily, and we can entertain any thought in a moment, right? And we can. So it didn't even. We weren't even in that exercise for 1 minute, and we were already. Most people were sit down, which means we have impatience, and so. God was showing me this the last time Pat and I, that I gave a message, we went out to eat with some people, and someone at the table spoke up and they said, gosh, I've been really struggling with impatience. And then I think Pat said, yeah, me too. And then pretty soon, just like dominoes, everyone at that table was dealing with impatience. And I thought, yeah, we do. And then I went home and a friend called me and said, hey, can you pray for me? I need patience. So that's what, that's how God works, right? He kind of shows us what, as a body, what we're dealing with and what needs to be addressed. And so, why do you think that was so hard? I mean, we do that on impulse almost. We cannot be still, right? And just wait on the Lord. And so, it's important that we do that we wait on the Lord. And I've noticed this thing about impatience. It's like a disease, right? Because when you see someone else becoming impatient, then all of a sudden you can feel that almost in your own spirit where you're around them and you're like getting anxious and impatient too. And when that one person displays it, it's just like projecting off onto everyone around you. And it's like the flu. And we begin to operate in that same spirit. It's a catchy spirit. It's one we don't want, right? And so we become like this sick patient just spreading that disease of impatience wherever we go. And so the title of this message for you, Brandon, because I know you write that down, learning not to become a sick patient of impatience, but to be patient. So that's what our message is going to be. Learning not to become a sick patient of impatience, but to be a patient. To be patient.
Did you get that, Brandon?
Should I say it again?
Yes, please. I'm not going to name it that on you.
Okay. Learning not to become a sick patient of impatience, but to be patient. Romans 15:1 says, we who are powerful need to be patient with weakness of those who don't have power and not please ourselves. And when I think about the definition of patience, I think of being able to be quiet, to be uncomplaining, enduring whatever that stress or annoyance is that you're dealing with, right? And that's hard to do because we need peace, and we need understanding, and we need wisdom, and we need self-control. So there's a lot of things we need to even be able to stay in the moment without getting impatient, wanting to go to that thought and entertain it. I had you guys demonstrate this, do this demonstrating starting off because I tried to do it myself and I was kind of like you guys. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm already, like I can't do it. Like I had a hard time just sitting in the moment with not thinking about anything but just being still. And so I knew it wouldn't be long and everyone would demonstrate what I too struggle with, which is impatience. But it does take that deliberate discipline to control those thoughts and wait on the will of God and not go before Him acting out of our flesh in lack of discipline, right? And we need to get to a place where no matter what that circumstance is that we're dealing with and whoever we're surrounded by, that we're able to operate in the discipline of patience and we don't get sick on picking up what others are carrying. We can do that. And so we're going to show you how to do that today. And when I thought of the stories in the Bible of impatience, of course, the first thing that popped up in my mind was the story of Abraham and Sarah and how they put their hands on it. I ain't going to talk about that because you all know that story. And the Lord actually highlighted another story that's a little bit more obscure. You don't see it. You have to dig a little to see what's going on. So we're not going to go in the obvious. We're going to go in a more unobvious direction today. And it's the story about David. And he's at the end of his life, and it's time to pass the kingship off to one of his sons. And earlier in David's reign, David had promised the kingdom to be, or the kingship to be passed down to his son Solomon. And we're going to pick that up in this story of 1 Chronicles 28, 1 through 6. And this is way early where I'm going to show you where it talks about that. Now David assembled at Jerusalem with all the leaders of Israel, the officers of the tribes and the captains of the divisions who served the king, the captains over thousands and captains over hundreds, and the stewards over all the substance and possessions of the king and of his sons, with the officials, the valiant men, and all of the men of valor, mighty men of valor. Then King David rose to his feet and said, "Hear me, my brother and my people. I had it in my heart to build a house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord and for the footstool of our God, and had made preparations to build it. But God said to me, 'You shall not build a house for my name, because you have been a man of war and have shed blood.'" Now that I underlined because it stood out to me that David, he said, you can't do that because you've been a man of war and bloodshed. So keep that thought as we go along here. "However, the Lord God of Israel chose me above all the house of my father to be the king over Israel forever. For he has chosen Judah to be the ruler, and of the house of Judah, the house of my father, and among the sons of my father, he was pleased with me to make me king over all of Israel. And of all my sons, for I do have many, he has chosen my son Solomon to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. Now he said to me, 'It is your son Solomon who shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father.'" So we see here that God showed David earlier in his reign which one of the sons he wanted to take over the kingship when he dies, and that he had a specific purpose in mind, and it was to build the temple. So he's already got a vision for Solomon's life and what he wants to do with Solomon, right? And I thought it was interesting that David, a man after God's own heart, was passed up to build God's temple. That intrigued me because I was like, why wouldn't he pick the man after his own heart to build this temple, right? And we know from the story of David and Goliath that David didn't hesitate to rush in and kill Goliath, right? And so sometimes boldness is needed. We do need that. But I would suggest that David might have been dealing with a little bit of impatience himself. And what was needed to build God's temple was someone who could slow down and pay attention to details, right? And complete the job according to the way God wanted it done. And patience would be needed for that. And the same is true when we're building up our own temple. It takes patience, right? That's not something you're just going to be able to rush into It takes patience to build our temple up. And so patience comes through peace and understanding and wisdom and self-control. And we'll go into that a little bit later on. But let's fast forward now to the end of David's life. Let's turn to 1 Kings 1:9. And it says, King David was very old, and no matter how many blankets covered him, he could not get warm. So his advisors told him, let us find a young virgin to wait on you and look after you, my lord. She will lie in your arms and keep you warm. So they searched throughout the land of Israel for a beautiful girl, and they found Abishag from Shunem and brought her to the king. And the girl was very beautiful, and she looked after the king and took care of him, but the king did not have sexual relations with her. So the reason I pointed this out, I'll tie it all together here, but we can see that I believe why they put this in the Bible the way they did is because we can see it shows the condition of David. He was at the end of his life. She was sent there. Abigash was sent there to more or less be his electric blanket and his hospice nurse. It wasn't the kind of relationship that we think of when you send someone, it's not distorted in any way. She had a duty, and it was to more or less keep him comfort to the end of his life and into kingdom. And so we go to verse 5, and it says, about that time, David's son Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, began boasting, I will make myself king. So we see some boasting going on from David's older son. And so he provided himself with chariots and charioteers and recruited 50 men to run in front of him. And now his father, King David, had never disciplined him at any time. And I underlined that. David never disciplined Adonijah. And even by asking, why are you doing that? And Adonijah had been born next after Absalom, and he was very handsome. And Adonijah took Joab, son of Zeruiah, and Abiathar, the priest, into his confidence, and they agreed to help him become king. So you see here some scheming. They're getting together. They're behind the scenes. They're trying to help Adonijah really take over this kingship out from underneath Solomon. But Zadok the priest, Benani son of Jehoiada, and Nathan the prophet, Shimei and Re, and David's personal bodyguards refused to support Adonijah. So people most closely to David, or the people that he knew had already been included in a different plan of the Lord's, he did not include. So there's Adonijah's being a little trickmeister. And Adonijah went to the stone of Zoheleth near the spring of En-Rogel, where he sacrificed sheep and cattle and fattened calves. He invited all his brothers. David said he had many sons, so he invited all of them, except who do you think? Solomon, right? So he invites all of them, and he takes advantage of his father, King David, his illness, and he sees an opportunity to make himself king. But God has already promised that throne to Solomon. We know that earlier because King David, when he was younger, declared that. So they all knew that. Adonijah's impatience has caused him to step into the obedience and exalting himself and manipulating people to support him into trying to get what he wants, which was the kingship. So it doesn't say that. You can tell that he's doing that because he's impatient. He knows his dad's death's coming, and he knows what the promise is, that Solomon's already going to step into that position. So what does he do? He oversteps himself, and he puts himself in a place where he's getting impatient. He knows his time's limited. When his dad passes away, that opportunity is gone, right? So we read on in verse 11:28, and then Nathan went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and asked her, haven't you heard that Haggith's son, Adonijah, has made himself king, and our Lord David doesn't even know about it? And if you want to save your own life and the life of your son Solomon, follow my advice. This is Nathan the prophet. Go at once to King David and say to him, my lord the king, did you make a vow and say to me, your son Solomon would surely be the next king and will sit on my throne? Why then has Adonijah become king? And while you are still talking with him, I will come in and I will confirm everything you've said. So the prophet Nathan is talking to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, and he's telling her, you better do something because your head's on the line if Adonijah gets in there and becomes king. So Bathsheba went into the king's bedroom. He was very old now, and Abishag was taking care of him. And Bathsheba bowed down before the king, and he said, what can I do for you? He asked her. And she replied, my Lord, you made a vow before the Lord your God when you said to me, your son Solomon will surely be the next king and will sit on my throne. But instead, Adonijah has made himself king. And my Lord, the king does not even know about it. He has sacrificed many cattle and fattened calves and sheep, and he's invited all the king's sons to attend the celebration. He also invited Abiathar, the priest and Joab, the commander of the army, but he did not invite your servant Solomon. And now, my lord, the king, all Israel is waiting for you to announce who will become the king after you. And if you do not act, my son Solomon and I will be treated as criminals as soon as my lord has died, my king has died. And while she was speaking with the king, Nathan the prophet comes in, and he says pretty much the same thing. He says, they say, the king, Nathan the prophet is here to see you. And Nathan went in and he bowed before the king with his face to the ground. And Nathan asked, my lord the king, have you decided that Adonijah will be the next king and that he will sit on your throne? Today he has sacrificed many cattle, fattened calves and sheep, and he has invited all the king's sons to attend the celebration. He also invited the commanders of the army and Abiathar the priest. They are feasting and drinking with him and shouting, long live King Adonijah. So he's out there. Adonijah's like putting the cart, you know what I mean, before the horse. He's really out there promoting himself. But he did not invite me or Zadok, the priest, or Benai, or your servant Solomon. Has my lord the king really done this without letting his officials know who should be the next king? And this is King David's response. He said, call Bathsheba. So she came back in, and she stood before the king, and the king repeated his vow, as surely as the Lord lives, who has rescued me from every danger, your son Solomon will be the next king and will sit on my throne this very day, just as I vowed to you before the Lord, the God of Israel. That's a lot, I know, but I wanted to give you the details of it because the details matter in this story. And one of the things that really quickened my spirit was when I was reading this, that it took two witnesses to convince David, right? It took two witnesses. It took both Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba to convince him to do what God had already told him to do. But the reason that is, when I dug into that a little bit more and why that was, it's because basically two witnesses represent prophetic truth and back in that day, and they serve as a counterpart to the false. So they did it the right way. Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba knew that that's the way God's works. It takes the witnesses of two to establish truth. Also probably why later on you see that they send out 2 by 2 so that truth, prophetic truth is there. That is an actual way that the Lord works. And Deuteronomy 19:15 says, one witness shall not rise against a man concerning any iniquity or any sin that he commits. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, the matter shall be established. So they were making it like concrete. Like, this is going on, David, and you're not even aware of it, you know. Which I think he was. He had to be, and I think David was in some sense because he didn't discipline him when he saw him doing stuff like that. And so David had to somewhat, but he kind of probably just dismissed it as, he's just playing king, you know, he's not really going to do anything. But so this story goes on that David actually does pass the kingship on the way he's supposed to, the way God had ordained it in the very beginning. And he passes that on to Solomon. And now Adonijah, he's scared for his life, and he should be, right? He should be, because he's doing all that scheming behind the scenes. And now guess what? now you are going to have to answer to that. And so he becomes frightened, and we see where he begs for his life, and he goes to Solomon, and he's begging Solomon not to kill him. And we pick that up in 1 Kings 1:52, where it says, Solomon replied, if he proves himself to be loyal, not a hair on his head will be touched. But if he makes trouble, he will die. So King Solomon summoned Adonijah, and they brought him down from the altar, and he came and bowed respectfully before King Solomon, who dismissed him, saying, go on home. So he gives him one pass. He gives him a pass. He says, I'm going to give you grace. You did that, but as long as you don't make trouble for me, you can live. But you'd think that's the end of the story, but no. Let's look on in 1 Kings 2:13-23, when one day Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, came to see Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and she said, have you come with peaceful intentions? That's what she asked him. He says, oh yeah, of course I am. I come in peace. In fact, I have a favor to ask you. And she says, what is it? And he replied, as you know, the kingdom was rightfully mine. There he is, entitlement, right? It's mine. And all of Israel wanted me to be the next king. But the tables were turned, and the kingdom went to my brother instead. For that is the way of the Lord wanted it. And I underline that. So he knew the truth, that God had already wanted his brother to carry this out. He professed it, so he knew. But he still wanted what he wanted, right? And so now he says, I just have one favor to ask of you. Please don't turn me away. And she says, what is it? Bathsheba says, what is it? And he replied, speak to King Solomon on my behalf, for I know he will do anything you request. Little schemer. Ask him to let me marry Abishag, the girl from Shunem. And she says, all right, I will speak to the king for you. So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak on Adonijah's behalf. And the king rose from his throne to meet her, and he bowed down before her. And when he sat down on his throne, the king ordered that a throne be brought for his mother, and she sat right to his right hand. And I have one small request to make, she says, and I hope you won't turn me down. So she's going, Bathsheba, which is Solomon's mother, goes on behalf of Adonijah, and she's making this request for Adonijah. And he says, what is it, my mother? You know I won't refuse you. And then let your brother Adonijah marry Abishag, the girl from Shunem. She replied, and how can you possibly ask me to give Abishag to Adonijah? King Solomon demanded. You might as well ask me to give him the kingdom. You know that he's my older brother and that he has Abiathar the priest and Joab son of Zeruiah on his side. Then King Solomon made a vow before the Lord, may God strike me and even kill me if Adonijah has not sealed his fate with his request. Uh-oh, his second chance is up. The Lord has confirmed me and placed me on the throne of my father. That's what David's going on and saying. I'm the one that was established. And he has established my dynasty as he promised. So as surely as the Lord lives, Adonijah will die this very day. So King Solomon ordered Benai, son of Jehoiada, to execute him, and Adonijah was put to death. I was like, man, that's harsh. You kill your own brother, right? But Solomon, so he had his brother killed, but when I read this story, I thought, I didn't think so much about that. What confused me was, well, why would that feel threatening to David to put, because he wanted to marry Abigash? Why would that threaten him? And when I dug into that a little bit more, it became crystal clear. And it's because back then, if you were asked to take care of the king in his dying days and be pretty much his hospice, that was a big honor. Like you're seeing him comfortably into the kingdom, right? And so she would have had heir to the throne for that duty alone. So Adonijah, he knew that she was going to have ties to the he could get in a back way. He was trying to still get into the back way to get that kingdom, right? So all of this stuff that Adonijah is doing, he's exalted himself, right? And he tried to manipulate his way into the kingship. And in the end, his impatience to be used by God it caused the death on his head. And so that's pretty harsh, but the reality is that impatience can bring death so it has serious consequences if we don't deal with it when we see impatience in our own life. And so I'm going to talk about impatience a little bit more in detail first, and there are some key elements that we can take away from this story to recognize the signs of whether we ourselves are operating in impatience and trying to put our hands on situations instead of waiting on the will of God, right? And so number one, manipulation will be the key component used in the situation to get what you want. That's impatient. If you see manipulation, it's a heart issue. So this is tied with a heart of selfishness. If you're trying to manipulate something and you're impatient and you're trying to put your hands on it to make it come out to the outcome that you want, your heart is selfish, and you need to take a look at your heart, and it should be selfless instead. Because here's the thing. If we want our will over the will of God's, we're not in right alignment. Right? Have you ever went to the store and you see little kids, and stores are good about this. They purposely put the candy right before you go out, right? And little kids pick up on this. They know when we get to the checkout, I'm going to ask Mom and Dad for that candy, right? And they'll get there and they'll be like, can I have candy? Can I? Right? And they get so impatient, and the parent's like, no. And what happens? 9 times out of 10, what's that kid start to do? Cry, throw a fit, on the ground. They're doing stuff. You're like, who's this kid? I don't know who this kid is, right? They're literally, what are they doing? They're manipulating you to buy the candy. They've learned, if I just make a little noise, Mom and Dad's going to give me that candy. They don't know that that's not good for them. They don't know that'll rot your teeth out. They want what they want. So we're taught young to manipulate. And it's so subtle, we don't even know we're doing it. The little kids don't know they're manipulating. They're just taught that. And if you give in to that and you don't discipline them, guess what? That becomes in their life. They start to use manipulation as a tool to get what their soul wants and not what God wants for them. And so we have to be careful about, even when we're training children up young, or even in our own life. Maybe we were trained up that way, right? Maybe our parents did that and gave in, and we don't even realize we're operating in a manipulating spirit, and we're just out of impatience know that if I make a little noise, I'm going to get what I want. That is That is a symptom of impatience. You may want to look and see if you're operating out of a manipulating spirit. I thought it was interesting, and I pointed it out when we went through the scriptures, that David did not discipline Adonijah. Did you catch that? It was very subtle. It's just one little line in there. It says he didn't discipline Adonijah. Oh, that was big, right? It's in there, but we kind of just skimmed over it. But you notice, right, that because he didn't do that, I believe that if David would have this is just my personal opinion, but I do believe it matters, that if David would have disciplined Adonijah when he saw him doing things that were out of the alignment of God, that he might have spared his son's life. And so, there are serious consequences when we see something out of alignment and we don't address it. This is number 2. We may be operating out of impatience if we feel a sense of entitlement. Entitlement is the right to a particular privilege or benefit granted by law or custom. And because Adonijah was the oldest living son of David at this time, he felt a sense of entitlement that the kingship should be rightfully his. I'm the oldest. Why is Solomon getting it? Because that typically was the tradition back then, is that the oldest son would get the whatever's the inheritance or whatever's owed to them. But because he stepped out of line, Adonijah knew that this was not his, and have you ever thought that you deserved like a promotion, but someone else got it? Let's say you've been at that company for a long time, and your seniority, I deserve that next promotion, but you didn't get it. They passed you up and gave it to someone else, right? That's kind of the situation that happened here with Adonijah. He felt like, I've got seniority. I should have this kingship, so I'm just going to take it. And I want to point out to be careful. We will act out of entitlement and try to take what was not supposed to be ours in the first place. But if we wait on God, He will give us the better promotion, and He will be the one to do the promoting. So don't step out of alignment because you feel entitled. If there's entitlement there, you need to explore that and figure out, where's your mind at? We're not entitled to anything. The Lord is the one who tells us our path, not us. Romans 8:32 says, He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? It didn't say some things. It says all things. And I'm telling you, if you got passed up for a promotion and you're waiting on the Lord to give you that promotion, that's going to be way far better than anything you could step into that's not of the Lord. Number 3, we may be operating out of impatience if we have to exalt ourselves to get what we want. I mean, Adonijah was going around, long live the king. I mean, he really put himself up there, didn't he? He did. Luke 14:11 says, For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. In the case of Adonijah, him trying to exalt himself humbled himself so low at 6 feet under, and you can't get any more humble than that. Right? It's true. You ain't going anywhere. That's going to be about as humble as you can get. Your life's gone. And it's all because he exalted himself. Number 4, we may be operating out of impatience if we are depending upon ourselves instead of God. That is pride. That is pride, guys. Our attitude may be that we don't need God. We can do this life all on our own, right? You've ever been there? I can do this. I don't need him, right? And so we try until we're frustrated. And when it doesn't happen in our own strength, we run to God as the second option. But what if we flip-flop that? What if we turned that around and we ran to God first? It would eliminate the need to even run to ourselves at all. Isaiah 55:9 says, For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than earth, higher than you, higher than me, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than yours. So that scripture tells me that we want the one that can see it better than we can, right? So manipulation, entitlement, exalting ourselves, and being prideful is all self-focused ways that cause us to operate in impatience. If you ask God for more patience, you better buckle up for the ride, right? Because here's the thing. What you're asking him is, send me more times that impatience can show its ugly face on my doorstep. That's what you're doing. But this is good, right? Because before patience can be mastered, you have to experience impatience. So that has to come. But just know that if you ask for it, that's what you're asking for. But there's training in that. So we have to have these moments where they show up in our lives in order to actually master them.
Yes, that's right.
Now I'm going to, Pat, you come into the picture now. Lucky you. He gets to be my example always. Pat went through this phase when we were driving in the car. This has been a while back, but he went through this phase where it was just, I'll just be honest, it was hard to be in the car with him because he had that road rage thing going on, where if someone cut him off or this person didn't turn their blinkers on or anything, he would have something animated to say about it, and I just went through. I was just like, oh my gosh, what's gonna, So when it just got rough riding in the car with him, and I thought, Lord, this is a tough one. Like, I don't know how to deal with this. And one day I said to him, you need to not let other people steal your joy, peace, and self-control. And it kind of took him back by surprise. He was like, huh? What are you talking about? Like, I don't even think, honestly, that he was aware that he was operating in that way until I just subtly said, why don't you take a look at that and take that to the Lord? And I left it at that. I didn't really say any more about it. And it was a few days later, we get into the car. And what happened, and I mean, this is one of those days where anything that can happen on the road, it manifested that day. And we get into the car, and someone cuts him off, and I'm like, oh no, what's going to come? Like, I'm anticipating it. He was silent. He's just like, like he didn't say a word, and I thought, well, that's strange. And I didn't say anything, and we went along, and pretty soon, someone in front of them didn't turn their blinkers on, and they tried to turn, and you know how it does. It jerks you. And I was like, and I just waiting there. I was like, is it coming now? When's it going to come? Is this going to be a rough ride today? And he's just like, And the third time come along, and I don't remember what it was, but it was one, like where someone cuts you off and you have to really, it kind of takes you back. And I was like, and he literally was stone-faced, just dry. I looked over at him and I said, what happened to you, Mr. Self-Control? Like, what's the turnover? And he said, I prayed for more patience. So God brought him all these times, and he'll do that. Don't be not expect. If you pray for it, just know that's going to ramp up. And I'm so proud of him because, guys, he's a different guy than he used to be. He's changed, and I'm blessed. But my point is, we don't have to give in to that flesh. We don't have to. We have a choice, right? And I ratted you out, but don't worry, I'll rat myself out later. Right. He never, by the way, Pat never hears these messages before, so I have to look at you and make sure you, he doesn't get to hear me practice them. He doesn't know the topic. I don't do that. I want him to be just as blessed as you guys. So he gets to hear it firsthand, just like you guys. So let's go into some symptoms that might manifest if you're impatient. We can catch that impatient flu, right? I talked about that. And we are impatient. And I don't know about you, but I've noticed that when I'm around someone who's impatient, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. You ever felt like that? They're impatient, and so you begin to go, oh my gosh, like I don't want to upset them. So, have you ever felt that? Like it's hard to be around impatient people because you don't ever know what's going to happen. And impatience, that flesh that's on them will begin to rub against your flesh. And so we have to catch that immediately when that's happening so that we don't let our flesh become whatever they're operating in their flesh. So let's talk about the symptoms. Number 1, the person becomes quick-tempered, irritable, and maybe easily angered. That's impatience. Proverbs 14:29 says, whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays foolishness, folly. And I remember looking at this video one time on the internet, and this guy was jaywalking right in front of his car, like when he was driving on the road. This guy jaywalked right in front of him, and the guy was like, he was doing that. He was getting all impatient with the guy, and he wasn't paying attention to where he was driving as he's chewing out the guy that's jaywalking, and he ran his car right into a telephone pole. So, and I mean, that's on the extreme, right? But we're going to be prone to accidents and lots of mistakes if we're quick-tempered and irritable or angry because we're stepping into irrational behavior. We are. And so James 1:19-20 says, "Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." I was like, oh, man. Number 2, another symptom of impatience is anxiousness, being filled with worry, fear, and doubt. Anxious comes from being uneasy or nervous about the outcome of an event, and you're uncertain of how it's going to turn out. So if you don't know how it's going to turn out, we can jump right into, oh my gosh, like, how is this going to, and what do? 9 times out of 10, we'll try to put our hands on it, and we'll try to direct that outcome, right? So I give an example of this because I used to do this. Now I don't anymore. I've learned, the Lord has trained me up in this. But let's say your money's not coming in the way that you want it to come in. And you know God's commandments. God's commandments is to give your 10%. But you're like, oh, I don't see the money. I don't see it coming. So what do? I'm just going to cut back in tithings. Oh my gosh. What a mistake. What a mistake. And let's say that even you take it further than that. You go and pick up a second job that you were never meant to pick up. You start doing things to make your circumstances fit, right? But guys, this is so important. The Lord showed me how important this is, that we take it to Him first. I'm telling you, if a lot of times when that money's not coming in, it's a test. It's a test to see if you will abide in Him and wait. And I guarantee you, if you'll wait and not step out and put your hands on it, not only will He fulfill it, that job's around the corner. It's over that threshold's right there, but we get to the threshold, and what do? We turn back and we step into it, and we get impatient. We put our hands on it, we make a mess. And this is what happens, right? We were right here on that threshold, right here. And because we didn't do what God's already commanded us to do, keep giving your tithings, keep praying and let Him show that job and supply that job. You were right here and the job was right here, but you missed it. So now you're stuck and doing 2 jobs and cutting back your tithings and doing the things that keep you stuck and bound. And you're impatient because you want what you want more than you want God's will. Philippians 4:6 says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer." Pray. If you're not seeing it, pray. "And supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God." So you're anxious. What's the antidote for anxiousness? Peace. You need peace. You're not peaceful when you're anxious. Your whole spirit is like, it's like this. And God says, come to me, pray to me. I'll give you that peace to squelch that anxious. I'll squelch that. He's an anxious squelcher. Yes, He is. "With thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds through Jesus Christ." Amen. It's right there. We have the antidote. We have it. Number 3, another symptom of impatience can be impulsiveness or lack of self-control. Okay? Impatience is a struggle for control, guys. And that actually causes us to act off of our emotions. Oh, those emotions get in the way, don't they? So we're acting off of emotions rather than using the wisdom and understanding needed in the situation that can only come from God. So you're replacing God's understanding and His wisdom for your emotions. You're letting your emotions dictate that. And yeah. When we lack self-control, we become frustrated with ourselves and our tongues can become loose, right? Damaging our character and those around us. Proverbs 21:23 says, "Those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity." Proverbs 25:28 says, a man without self-control is like a broken city into and left without walls. I was like, oh, that's an ugly picture. That's devastation. Like if you don't have any walls, I was thinking about this. What were walls built for back in well, we even do it today. Why do we build walls? It's to protect us from the enemy. So if your tongue's running rampant and you don't have self-control over that tongue, guess what? You've got a broken down, you have no protection. That wall is down and you better watch out because here comes the enemy. Matthew 15:17-18 says, do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and it defiles another man. Wow. So we can have diarrhea of the mouth and vomit detestable things that come out of our mouth that pour over all of those around us. We can do that. And so lack of self-control is more or less leaving ourselves wide open for the enemy to make us into impatient, sick patients vomiting that stuff. We've become a sick person of impatience, and we are projecting that with our mouth and making a mess. Okay, now I get to wrap myself out. This is mine, Pat. I'll let you off the hook, kind of. It still has you in it. So I've noticed this impatient thing. You know, Pat and I, when we were talking back at the restaurant and we were sitting with people, we had noticed some impatient moments in our own life. And Pat and I work from home and Pat works, he commutes back and forth. So it's very rarely that you get us both in the car at the same time, right? And so it's more or less if we have to go get groceries, go to town for something, or if we're coming to church. And we noticed this impatient thing starting. We started, and you'll get a picture of this. So we start out our drive on, let's say it's Sunday morning. It's almost every Sunday morning, but we're getting better, right, Pat? So every Sunday morning, I noticed this thing going on where we get on the road. It's like 2 minutes in, and I hear this ding, 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 ding noise, and I'm like, Pat, do you have your seatbelt on? He doesn't say anything. And he's thinking about, I got to get this coffee. He's drinking his coffee, and he's fiddling with his phone because he always puts a praise and worship song on for us to listen to on the way over. So he'll be fiddling with that, and we'll go a couple more miles down the road, and ding, 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 ding. I'm like, Pat, would you please put your seatbelt on? I'm a little elevated at this point. I'm just a little elevated. And he goes on. He's doing his thing, and it's our time to catch up. We don't get to see each other like most people do. We're kind of passing ships sometimes. So that's kind of our intimacy time, our time to really lay what's on our hearts. We share, we catch up. So he's all about that. Like, this is going on at work, this. We go 2 more miles down the road. Ding, 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 ding. And I'm like, Pat, would you put your seatbelt on? It's driving me crazy. So at this point, I have stepped into impatience. And I am like, dude, can you not hear the beeping? What's going on? Like, put it on. And then he's mad. My flesh has rubbed off on his flesh. And he's like, gosh, what are you nagging me for? Like, stop. And it's just, we get here and we have a peaceful, nice message from Brandon. We're just so full of the Lord, right? And I say that with sarcasm, but what if we picked up every little thing that irritated us? What if we do that? And we let it do that to us, get us out of what God's called for our life. And so this was happening. It was just it was like that little snaky thing you were talking about where it just drove me nuts. And so this time that's supposed to be beautiful between us had become not so beautiful, let's just say. And it was not that long ago that Brandon was sharing about a dream that he had with these little irritant snakes. Do you remember that? And he was saying that they would come and bite him, his flesh, and And they were harmless, but they would bite him, and they were annoying him. And the minute he would pull them off, they'd come right back. And that's kind of what I was dealing with. And I knew that message was talking about this situation that I was having with Pat in the car. And so Brandon was seeking the Lord on the meaning of the dream, and he felt like the Lord was saying, die to your flesh. Get rid of your flesh, and they don't have anything to grab onto. And so I was like, oh, okay, I need to take that nugget he gave me, and I need to apply it to this situation because I am out of sorts. I'm out of control. I need to apply what he's talking about here. So I sat with the Lord, and this is where that may be a little thing, but that's our time to bond. So I need to figure this out, right? That's a little thing to someone, but we have to have a place of peace in our communion together, and it had not become that over something as little as beeping. And so Satan was trying to steal that moment from us, but I knew I needed to take back control of that situation and apply what my pastor had released about this. I knew what it was. It is those little snakes that are just nipping at me, and my flesh was like, leave me alone. Like, I was reacting. So I was thinking about Brandon's message and how I can apply this with the seatbelt thing. And I began to have this dialogue with the Lord. You ever do that? Sit down and say, okay, let's dig into this. Let's get to the bottom of what's going on. So I'm sitting down with the Lord, and I hear him say, well, Becky, why does this irritate you so much? And this is my reasoning, so you get to see the inside of my head with the Lord. I said, well, Lord, he's going to get a seatbelt ticket. We don't have $120-some and change to pay for that. And the Lord said, he spoke this to my soul. He said, he'll have to pay that ticket, and it's on his record, not yours. And I was like, okay. And so then I was like, well, Lord, this is where you get a little prideful. Lord, you tell me, according to your word, that I'm supposed to be his helper. And I'm just trying to fulfill my wifely duties. I said that to the Lord. You know what he said to me? You know what he said to me, guys? He said, haven't you already told him 1,527 times to wear his seatbelt? I think he already knows, so you don't need to remind him anymore, Becky. And he went on to speak to my heart. My word also says, Proverbs 21:19, you better to live in a desert than a quarrelsome and nagging wife. And I was like, ouch. That hurt, Lord, that hurt. And at that moment, I realized that God will put you in your own britches real quick. He'll check you. And my rebuttal was, well, it's irritating me. I don't want to listen to that noise all the way to church. You know what he said? And it's not irritating for Pat to listen to a nagging wife on the same trip. He did. He said, Becky, sometimes I'll allow you to experience impatience so that you can learn to master patience. So I was thinking about Brandon's snake story, and I was thinking of ways I could turn my impatience into patience. And the first thing that popped in my head, now this is the enemy, right off, because he'll try to come and take away what God's doing. And the first thing that popped into my mind is, I know how to solve this. Every time I hear a ding, I will just give myself $20 and I'll have a good budget to go out and make myself happy. And the Lord said, Becky, that is manipulation. That is manipulation. And it was. What a thought. How self-centered was that? And so I'm like, oh, he's asking me to go deeper than that. Darn it. That would solve the problem for me. But that's selfish, right? That's selfish nature. That's my flesh still wanting what I want. That's my flesh. So the second thing that came into my mind is every time I hear a ding in the car, I will thank God for the wonderful things that I do have, like a husband willing to put a song of worship on. Number two, if I hear a second ding, I'll say thank you for a car. A lot of people don't have a car, right, Rochelle? She doesn't have one right now. She's, or maybe you do, but I know you were in an accident. So be thankful for the car. Heck, we have a car. We get to spend time together. Number 3, if I hear dinging. Maybe that last ding is that my husband wants to, I'm going to be thankful that my husband wants to share his innermost parts with me. That's a gift. Not everyone has that. And so I needed to shift. Oh, I needed to shift. I was thinking on the wrong things, right? And this constant beeping noise, it had to do with my flesh. And I know the Lord was trying to tell me, you've got to die to that flesh, Becky. Those things do not matter. I'm doing a bigger picture here. Get your focus on the things above. And so he got a hold of me, guys. I know this seems little to you, a dinging noise. You know, that's nothing. But I know we are dealing with much bigger things than dinging noises that we give into, right? And so this is a chance to check ourselves in those areas where we're impatient. Take it to the Lord. He wants to reveal how to shift that mindset and get us back where we're in alignment with God's will and not living out in a selfish heart, wanting our will over His. That's dangerous. So I was thinking there's so many things to be thankful for in the midst of this experience with impatience. And pretty soon, if we'll step into dying to that flesh and not giving in to the irritants of life and changing that mindset to live the spirit of thankfulness and gratitude, we will find that God has carried us through that impatient moment. We're crossing the threshold. You're going to get out of that. But it requires, guys, it requires peace and understanding and wisdom and self-control. We have to have those nuggets, and we're going to go into this in more detail. 2 Corinthians 2:14 says, "But thanks be to God who always leads us in Christ's triumphal procession and through us spreads the aroma of knowledge of Him in every place." Man, that means when we step into His ways, not only are we triumphant, but we're a sweet aroma to Him. We're a sweet aroma, and it's pleasing to God, and that covers us with His knowledge and understanding, right? Not our emotional His wisdom that follows us everywhere we go. And when we step into operating with His knowledge and understanding and wisdom, guys, that's a whole, literally, you can become patient in any situation you find yourself in, any situation. And we are in a lot of impatient situations. So we've talked about impatience, but let's look at the other side, the patient side. What does it take, right? Have you ever heard the saying patience is a virtue? A virtue is a trait of excellence, conduct that agrees with moral rightness and having high moral standards. And when God gave us the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control, I don't know if you noticed this, but if of all the fruits of the Spirit that they're intertwined, right? And if you lack one, it trickles over into the other. So we can't lack that. And I think that patience is a virtue because if you can master patience, it really is beneficial to all the other fruits of the Spirit that the Lord wants to give us. It's really key. Patience is a big one. So do we not want to have high moral standings? Do we not want virtue in our life? That comes through patience. And remember at the beginning I said patience requires 4 things. It requires peace, and it requires understanding, and it requires wisdom and self-control. So let's break that down a little bit. Peace is a state of being free from violence and conflict and actually stepping in a place of tranquility and harmony. To build our temple up takes peace. You can't build a temple up the way that God wants you to build your temple with anger and all those other things trying to take over. You have to have peace in your soul to build it the right way. But because we still live in our flesh, the two are at war with one another. And so in John 16:33, Jesus is reassuring his followers that they can have peace and succeed in pleasing God, even if in the face of trials and opposition. And we see John 16:33 says, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have troubles, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." So even though our flesh is at war with our spirit, spirit trumps flesh. It trumps it. The spirit will always trump flesh if you'll give in and surrender to the spirit. Our spirit is Jesus who lives in us, and he overcomes and brings peace in areas where we're not able to bring peace. But we have to choose to yield to the spirit and not give in to our flesh. And when we do that, it's like we're stepping in harmony with God. That's where the peace comes from. When you step into obedience to get in alignment with God, it brings a harmony. You ever heard someone sing and they're out of tune with each other? And it's like, I mean, it's awful. It's like, oh gosh, that hurts the ears. Don't do that, right? But have you heard someone who isn't, like, where the harmony is so beautiful that you're like, wow, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful tune to the ears. That's what it's like when we get in alignment with God and when we step into his peace and allow that peace to trump the unrest in our lives and whatever that impatient situation that arises. Okay? Patience requires understanding. We're going to run into people all the time that are at different levels of spiritual growth than we are, right? And in fact, we're going to run into people that don't have any spiritual walk at all. They're not even saved. And so there's this there needs to be a level of understanding of where they are at in their spiritual walk so that we can extend grace where grace is needed. And I think back of the days when I was spiritually blind and the grace that my parents and my grandparents had to have to deal with the choices I was making when I was out of alignment with God. And I'm thankful that they were praying for me behind the scenes and waiting for God's timing. They were patient. And my mom and my friend Sylvia had invited me to a Women of Faith event, and I had made up some excuse why I couldn't go. And they bought me a ticket anyway in faith. See, this is where you can step out in faith. They bought me a ticket, and I'm like, I'm not going. And they're like, oh, she'll go. We're going to pray behind. And I went because I felt the calling. Those prayers that they put up for me, the Lord, when you do that, when you send prayers for something that you want to change, but you don't put your hands on it, but you send that prayer up to God, he answers and sends his help down. He sends his divine help to come and quicken that person's spirit to answer the call. And that's what happened. I knew they were praying for me, but I didn't understand what was going on in the spiritual realm. But I answered that call, and that going to that women's faith concert changed my life forever, because I got there and I didn't realize that there was a whole nother world of believers out there, and I'd never experienced the Holy Spirit. You know, you get in a room and it's like, whoa, the Holy Spirit's here. That was the first time I'd experienced it, and I said, I'm missing something, and I want that. It turned my life around because my mom and her friend did not they were patient, they prayed, but they were warring for me behind the scenes. And that is a key, guys, for the people that you see that aren't quite there yet, and you may not see that coming to fruition yet, but you can do a lot in the spiritual realm with partnering with God. And so once I answered the call to that, it was like I had stepped into harmony with God, and he's like, let's go. And so what before all that flesh that was banging up against me, making that gong, that noise, had become still, and my life was in harmony with God. And man, where he's taken me from then to now is just beautiful. It's beautiful music to the Lord. It really is. It's a fragrance to him to see that growth and that obedience and stepping into that. Matthew 7:3-5 says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. You see, when I was trying to jump over into Pat's lane by shouting at him to put his seatbelt on, right? I couldn't even see the problem I had with nagging him to do it. I was blind. I could see his problem. I sure couldn't see my nagging. I couldn't do that. So I had blindness, right? And so before we start taking specks out of other people's eye, we better check our own. We better check our own. Number 3, patience requires wisdom. Wisdom can only be attained in one way. It comes from the Lord, and wisdom requires seeing things through a different lens, through the eyes of Jesus. And it's tied to that message that Brandon has been talking about, where you have to go to ascended place to get the better view. You better take that message to heart, because there's a lot of goodness in that. And that's the key to wisdom. And wisdom is the key to patience. You have to have wisdom in order to exercise patience. They're tied together. So if you're on the ground, you can only see the direction that's forward and backward and sideward, like Brandon was saying, right? But if you take that helicopter view, oh boy, you can see it all. You can see the bigger picture, right? And that's where God wants to take us. And once you can do that, if you can sit and abide with him and allow him to show you, just like I did with the Lord, where I had that dialogue with the Lord. Now, I couldn't see on the ground, just dealing with Pat one-on-one. I could not see it. I could not see what the problem was. But when I went to the Lord and said, you got to show me what's going on here, and he showed me my part in it, right? I got the bigger picture. I'm like, oh, my Lord, I am just as impatient as Pat. Like, we are a mess. We need to work on this, right? So you can see the speck in your own eye. And once you remove your part, that's when God can come in, because, you know, you're cultivating your side of the fence. You're doing what God's called you to do to get you in harmony with him. And if you'll pray to the Lord on the other side, he'll make that happen on the other side. Wisdom takes the limitations off of a restricted view, our view, and it trades it in for the limitless view that can only come from God's lens. And that new view will help us to walk in righteousness, peace, gentleness, submissiveness, abounding in mercy, and bearing good fruits. And how do I know that? James 3:17 says, but the wisdom that is from above is pure. Then it's peaceable, then it's gentle, and it's willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. When I was dealing with Pat in the car and the seatbelt issue, I didn't have the eyes of Jesus in that situation, and I only saw it from my view. And I was a hypocrite in wanting peace in the vehicle while creating a gonging noise of nagging from my own mouth. Number 4, patience requires self-control. Self-control requires discipline. And back in the story of David, David did not discipline Adonijah, which resulted in Adonijah having lack of discipline, right? And so Adonijah's impatience was from lack of self-control to wait on God and see what God specifically had for him. Hebrews 12:11 says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Right? Who wants to be disciplined? That stinks. No one wants to be disciplined. However, later on, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained up by it. So we got to train ourselves. We have to train ourselves. 1 Corinthians 9:25 says, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it with a crown that will not last, but we do it with a crown that will last forever. And a lot of you don't know this about me, but I used to compete in powder puff demolition derbies. I know, hard to believe, right? I was a little aggressive, right, Pat? But I have trophies from that time of my life, but what good are those trophies now? They're tarnished and they're put up on a shelf, and it was good for a season, but learning to use self-control and discipline produces patience, and patience is a virtue, an excellent trait of high moral standing that is eternal value. So you may be doing things that you think are great, but if they don't have eternal value, it's nothing. So my self-control is way more important than some trophy sitting up on a shelf somewhere. Self-control is the ability to put aside your emotions and desires in difficult situations and trading in your will for the will of God. This type of training up comes from the Lord and produces patience to wait on the Lord. All right, that's all I got. I'm going to close out. Let's just bow our heads here. Lord, I've thrown a lot at the body today, but Lord, I trust in you, Lord, to take this seed and grow it. I pray that everyone would have an open mind to receive. Maybe there's places in every person's life in here that needs to have a